I'm not sure what you think of when I read a gospel passage. Maybe you experience what sometimes happens to me when the scripture is read, your mind wanders. But this morning, try to put this thought in your mind as you listen to Luke chapter 20, verses 27 through 38. Imagine that you had to write a sermon for this reading. Luke 20, 27 to 38. Some Sadducees, those who say there is no resurrection, came to Jesus and asked him a question. Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, leaving a wife but no children, the man shall marry the widow and raise up children for his brother. Now, there were 7 brothers. The first married and died childless. Then the second and the third married her also. And so in the same way, all 7 died childless. Finally, the woman too died. In the resurrection, Jesus, whose wife will the woman be? For the 7 had married her. Jesus said to them, those who belong to this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are considered worthy of a place in that age and in the resurrection are neither married nor given in marriage. Indeed, they cannot die anymore because they are like angels and are children of God, being children of the resurrection. And the fact that they are dead, the fact that the dead are raised, Moses himself showed in the story about the bush, when he speaks of the Lord as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now he is not the God of the dead, but of the living, for to him all of them are alive. So if anyone would like to come up, give you 10 minutes. November 9th, 2003, 13 years ago. Where were you and what were you doing? November 9th. Now, if I tell you it was a Sunday, does that help? November 9th, 2003. It was the Sunday I delivered my best sermon ever. Certainly, you remember. It was also the first Sunday that Don and Barbara Allard visited, invited by Bill and Ginny Littlefield. A good day indeed. The sermon that day, a week after All Saints' Day, my sermon was titled St. Bill. Now, I'd only known Bill for 18 months at that point, but in that short period of time, he made a deep impression on me. Now, I'd never heard him quote a Bible verse, never heard him say a prayer out loud, or do anything overtly religious. But I was so impressed with his commitment to living the good life, to making a difference, to helping others, especially some of the most vulnerable people around. And since that time, I've gotten to know Bill much better, and those first impressions have only been confirmed over and over again. And how Bill has faced his terminal cancer is inspiring and an example for all of us. So you all know, and Bill knows, I love him. But Bill had a Michael moment 5 or 6 years ago. That's right, a Michael moment. Now, Bill was the chair of our facility committee, and on a Sunday morning, he stood up to make an announcement. An announcement some of you will certainly remember, although I'll ask you not to heckle this time. Here's what he said. Next Saturday, we have our fall work day. He talked a little bit about what needed to be done, raking the leaves, pruning some trees, closing down the memorial gardens, stuff like that. And then he had his Michael moment when he said, and we need some women to wash the windows. Oh my, me thinks. Did he just say some women to wash the windows? More than a few gasped and hissed and heckled. A Michael moment indeed. Now hold on to that thought. And let's go back to the gospel reading. That rather bizarre story about the widow who married 7 brothers. And the Sadducees' question, to whom will she belong in the age to come? You see, the Sadducees didn't believe in the afterlife, any sort of life beyond this world. And with this unsolvable conundrum, They knew they had Jesus. They painted him into a corner. To whom will she belong? You could almost hear them snickering. Gotcha, Jesus. For the Sadducees, for a lot of men throughout history, a woman had to belong to some man to have an identity. First her father, then her husband. It's why at some weddings, even today, we still say those archaic words, who gives this woman to be married to this man? I do, the obedient father responds. She was mine, and now I'm giving her to him. The Sadducees' problem was a failure of imagination. They couldn't possibly imagine, they couldn't possibly conceive of a world, not even the world to come, where a woman didn't belong to some man. A failure of imagination. That may be one of the most fundamental problems we face today in our world, for we lack leaders with creative imagination. We seem to believe that how the world has been is how it has to be. Or maybe worse, we think that how things are is the way they're meant to be. Sadly, Pope Francis, whom I have a lot of respect for, but sadly, he had a Michael moment this last week when he said, on the ordination of women in the Catholic Church, the last word is clear. Essentially suggesting that how things are reflects God's will. Men will run the church and women will, well, wash the windows. Oh my, Francis. We have a failure of imagination anytime we think like this. You hit me, I'll hit you back. You holler vicious things in my direction, I'll holler louder, more vicious things in yours. After all, that's how the world seems to work. It's a dog-eat-dog world, isn't it? But what if it's possible to live differently, to see differently? What if I don't have to call you names when you call me names? I don't have to hit you back when you hit me. At its best, our faith ought to help us imagine a world where our better angels have the final word, where we bring out the best of each other and not the worst, where we don't respond tit for tat, where the operating manual doesn't dictate an eye for an eye, where we imagine that one day maybe swords will be turned to plowshares and the lion and the lamb will lie down peacefully. And sometimes we lack imagination when it comes to ourselves. I'm the dumb one, the fat one, the slow one, the unlovable one. I'm the one who always ends up on the short side, rather than recognizing how life has gifted us, all of us, and rather than seeing all that is good and right about us and how lovable we are. If I were in charge for one day, scary thought for some of you, but here's what I think I would suggest: a national timeout. A time to hit the pause button, to take a deep breath, so that we might take an inventory of what we've become, to allow ourselves a moment just to reflect and to question all that's been said the last 2 years, and to ask ourselves, is it true? And then how do we know it's true? Something isn't true just because someone says it all the time or says it loudly. I happened upon a story that when I first read it this week, I thought it was kind of silly, but the more I thought about it, I thought maybe it wasn't so silly. There's a woman who desperately wanted peace in the world and peace in her own heart, and all sorts of good things, but she was so frustrated. The world seemed to be falling apart, unraveling. She'd read the papers and watch the cable news and get more depressed. So one day, she decided to go shopping. A little silly, I know. She went to a store she'd never shopped in before, and she was stunned to see who behind the counter. Jesus. I know, silly. And she knew it was Jesus because of the beard, the piercing blue eyes of this Jewish man. And he looked like all those pictures she's seen in the Bible. She got the courage and said, "Are you Jesus?" And he said, I am. Do you work here? Actually, I own the place. What do you sell? Oh, just about anything. Anything? Anything you want. What would you like? I'm not so sure, she said. Well, Jesus said, feel free to walk around and look and make a list. See what you want and then come back and give me the list and we'll see what we can do. And she did just that. Up and down the various aisles, there was peace on earth. No more war, no hunger, no poverty. Peace in our families. No more drugs. Harmony, clean air. Careful use of resources. She wrote down furiously. By the time she got back to the counter, her list was long. Jesus took the list, smiled, said, not a problem. Then he bent down behind the counter, picked up all sorts of things, and then he handed them to the lady. And she said, what is this? And he said, these are packets, seed packets. This is a catalog store. She said, you mean I don't get the finished product? He said, no, this is a place of dreams. You come and you see what the world could look like. And I give you the seeds and you plant them and you go home and you nurture them and help them grow and someone else will reap the benefits. Oh, she said, disappointed as she left the store without buying anything. Silly story, right? Or maybe not. What if all we really needed was within our reach? Our dream is to dream those dreams. That really shouldn't be that big of a dream, like a country where we don't yell at each other, where cooperation and compromise are anathema, a world that allows all of us to flourish, where we don't automatically be suspicious of others because they speak a different language or worship differently than we do. A dream where our grandchildren's children enjoy clean air and water. And maybe if the big dream, the big picture is too much, maybe we start with that great thought from Martin Luther King, who spoke these words: if I cannot do great things, I can do small things in a great way. Small things in a great way. Amen.